Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdadan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we completed part 1 and inshallah we'll be starting part 2. This part inshallah will be covering the Arabic letters. Inshallah we'll be covering the articulation points of the Arabic letters, makharij al-huruf, and the qualities of the Arabic letters, as-sifat al-huruf. And this is an integral part, a very crucial part of learning Tajweed. If you recall, we discussed in the introduction video that the applied definition of the word Tajweed is actually to articulate every letter from its articulation point and giving every letter its right due to its characteristics. And the characteristics could be permanent and they could be temporary, but inshallah that's something we'll look at inshallah in the future slides. So it's the actual meaning of learning Tajweed is to articulate the letters correctly. Now one out of the two most common mistakes made by all non-Arabs, whether you're from the West or from Europe or from Africa or Indo-Pac continent or from Eastern Asia, the mistakes that are made are in the pronunciation of the letters. And you could master the rules, but it's this point, it's this area that we really need to focus on as non-Arabs. And it's not just because there are some letters that occur in Arabic and they're not common in other languages, but because we have some letters that do sound similar. For example, the kaf, we have fa, lam, ra, for example. But for example, we have, but they don't actually share the same articulation point. So, for example, we have the L, for example, but it's not the same as lam, for example. So, inshallah, in this part, we'll be covering the letters in detail to inform you and to give you the knowledge of all of the articulation points for each letter, so you can differentiate and make letters correct and perfect, inshallah. So, basically, 2 out of the 4 principles that we covered in the introduction, we've talked about this. So 2 out of the 4 principles are covered in this lesson, inshallah, in this part. The first one being the knowledge of the articulation points of the letters, and the second is the knowledge of the characteristics of the letters, the permanent and the temporary ones. The third principle was the application of the rulings, which inshallah we'll be looking at in the third part. And the last principle is what you have to do with a teacher, and that is the practice of the recitation, and practice what you are learning, inshallah. Practice and implement. So, Bismillah, we'll begin. Okay, so the articulation points of the Arabic letters. The articulation point is the place of emitting the letter when pronouncing it. It's the place from which the sound of a letter originates. So it's the sound of the letter where it originates from. 2 ways to pinpoint the articulation point for a letter. So these are 2 exercises you could do to see if you're using the correct articulation point. The first is to precede the non-voweled letter with a hamza, with any vowel on it. So you could put a fatha or a kasra or dhamma, anything before it. And then you pronounce and hear the letter, and when the sound is cut off, that is the articulation point being used. Okay, so for example, in this example, we have the hamza and we have the fatha and the letter sheen. If we're practicing the letter sheen, for example, sheen comes from the middle of the tongue. So to see if we're using the correct articulation point, we will try and say like this: ash, ash. So, and sheen has other characteristics with it, and together with that we will check if we're using the correct articulation point. The next example is with a dad, al, yeah, and then you can see dad comes from the actually comes from the sides of the tongue, and then we have to make sure that we're using the correct articulation point by and using its with its characteristics. We're saying the dad from the sides of the tongue, and this is a very good way to check. And this, the next example is ayn, and this is quite a tricky letter for most non-Arabs because it doesn't really exist in many other languages. It's very particular to the Arabic language. Still, inshallah, we'll try and say and then where the is cutting off, that's where the articulation point is for the letter. So ayn, the articulation point is, for example, it's the middle of the throat. So we're going to make sure we say and where it's cutting off, that is the articulation point for ayn. And you can touch your throat and just feel the middle of the throat and and you feel a vibration, and try to say this in this way, inshallah, and practice. The other thing you can do is say the letter with a shadda. Now this one would maybe be better because it's actually two letters, because shadda means double. Abba, for example, abba, where I'm saying ab, that's where the letter this is cutting off, that's the sound cutting off, that's the makharij of ba, abba. Same with atta, the tip of the tongue, I'm saying atta, where I'm saying at, that's where the sound is cutting off, that's the makharij of da. So inshallah, this is a very good way to check your pronunciation, and if you're using the correct articulation point, inshallah, after you find out in the next slides where each letter is coming from, inshallah, and exiting from. Bismillah. Major areas of articulation. The scholars laid out 4 major organs of speech that have within them the 17 different articulation, or you can call them exit points, for the 29 letters of the Arabic alphabet. So these are the 4 major organs: al-jawf, al-halq, al-fam, al-khayshum. These are the 4 major organs that we need to pronounce the letters correctly, and the letters have been divided into these 4 major organs of speech. Okay, inshallah, we'll be looking at them in more detail in the further lessons, but just to explain this diagram to you, al-jawf is the empty space. The first one is al-jawf, the empty space in the chest, throat, and the mouth. So one exit point, there's one exit point, and 3 of the lengthened letters come from this specific organ of speech. Okay, the empty space in the chest, throat, and mouth. This is the empty space and the sounds that come from this area. So it's just coming from the chest, through the throat, and out of the mouth. The sounds, the lengthened letters are alif, waw, and ya. They are known as the mud letters. Without going into too much detail, it's the sounds that when we have in the Qur'an, certain words, certain letters are extended. For example, in ya ayyuhalladhina, for example, the ya, the a sound comes from one of the lengthened letters, which is alif. The word amanu, for example, the waw is extended. Okay, waw is also one of the lengthened letters, and the sound oo comes from the al-jawf. And the letter ya, so for example in alladhi, the e sound, when you say e, you can feel it come from the chest, coming out through the throat, and the empty space in the mouth, and the tongue is not used. The tongue stays where it is. So it's these 3 sounds that come from al-jawf. Okay, inshallah, in the next lesson we'll be looking at this in a little bit more detail, inshallah. The second is al-halq, which is the throat, and there's 3 exits and 6 letters. So in each exit point, the bottom of the throat, so this bottom of the throat, the middle of the throat, and the top of the throat. That's how they are split into in the throat. These letters, these 6 letters, and there's 2 letters on each exit. Okay, so there's 2 on the bottom of the throat, 2 in the middle of the throat, 2 on the top of the throat. Come from these areas, these points. But what differentiates them from each other is, yes, the qualities, the characteristics that are attached to each letter, giving them an individual identity and individual quality to help you pronounce them. So we've done al-jawf, al-halq, and the third one is al-fam. And al-fam here, the reason why we have 4 organs of speech, and I know it's commonly taught as 5 organs of speech in Tajweed books and Tajweed lessons, but all that's happened here is the shafatan and al-lisan have been merged into al-fam, because obviously they form part of the mouth. That's why it's just been merged, and that's why it's 4 organs of speech and not 5. So nothing has been forgotten. Everything's in there. So the mouth, it includes the palate, the tongue, the teeth, and the 2 lips. And 22 letters exit from these parts of the mouth. And we have al-lisan, the tongue. It has 10 exits. Subhanallah, such a small organ, and it has 10 exits and 18 letters, because some of these letters share the same exit, and what differentiates them is the characteristics. Shafatan, we have 2 exits and 4 letters, and included in al-fam is obviously the teeth. Okay, we need some letters, the tongue, al-lisan. We will touch certain parts of the teeth. Sometimes it will be the front incisors, sometimes it will be the molars or the canines. The tongue will touch specific parts of the teeth sometimes, and that to pronounce certain letters. So obviously we need the teeth. That's another organ of speech. The roof of the mouth is another very important part that is used, organ of speech. The hard palate is used, and the soft palate at the back is used for certain letters. So the tongue touches the soft palate or the hard palate. So this all in all forms the mouth, the organ of speech, which is the mouth. And then we have the last one, which is al-khayshum, the ghunna, the nasal passage, which is a sound. And certain letters, there's 2 letters that have the khayshum associated with it, the nasal passage, the sound associated with it. And there's certain rules that also need this nasal passage. So this is the 4th one. So alhamdulillah, you've just seen how these 17, if you count them up, there will be 17 exit points, and all the 29 letters are divided into these 17 different articulation points and the 5 organs of speech. So these are the 4 major organs of speech that we need, that the Arabic alphabet requires. So alhamdulillah. So inshallah we will continue the next lesson with al-jawf and al-halq. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.